Your brain has been trained to expect a reward every few minutes. Tonight, that expectation disappears. It's just past midnight. Your room is quiet, the glow of your phone still fading from your eyes. One by one, you've deleted your social media apps, blocked your favorite sites, hidden the junk food, and promised yourself 7 days with no quick dopamine hits, no scrolling, no porn, no gaming binges, no constant snacking. On the surface, it feels like you just trimmed a few bad habits. Inside your brain, you've just pulled the fire alarm. The first few minutes feel strangely empty. Your hand drifts to your pocket before you even notice. Phantom phone grabs. Your thumb swipes across a blank home screen, looking for icons that are no longer there. You open the browser out of reflex, stare at the blocked page, and close it again. It's like a ghost routine playing out without your permission, a habit loop that hasn't yet realized the reward is gone. Your body is still, but your brain is pacing. As the first hour passes, the urges come in waves. You feel a pull to check notifications that don't exist, to reach for snacks you already hid. You wander to the kitchen, open a cabinet, close it, then walk back to your desk with nothing. This is the phase when your reward system starts asking questions. Neurons in your striatum, the habit and reward center, fire with expectation, then fall silent when no hit arrives. Think of it this way. Your brain has been running on a rapid-fire schedule of tiny rewards, and you just canceled the entire calendar. Beneath the boredom and mild frustration, a quiet drama is unfolding. Dopamine pathways that usually light up at every ping and pop-up are now understimulated. Your motivational circuits feel confused, like a GPS that suddenly lost all its saved destinations. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that plans, focuses, and says no, is trying to take control, but the older, reward-hungry circuits keep interrupting with cravings. Meanwhile, your emotional centers, like the amygdala, may start flagging this change as a potential threat. You feel restless, uneasy, maybe even a little anxious, even though nothing bad has happened. In fact, this is not just a willpower challenge. This marks a turning point in how your brain handles reward and motivation. For years, maybe decades, your cells have been trained to expect fast, frequent spikes of dopamine from screens, sugar, novelty, and escape. Now, for the next 7 days, those hits are gone. What happens next is not mystical and not a magical detox. It is a rare experiment in modern life, a chance to watch how deeply your habits have rewired your focus, drive, and mood. Over this week, your brain will move from withdrawal and confusion to recalibration and potential clarity. Region by region, circuit by circuit, you'll see what science says actually happens when you stop chasing constant stimulation and let your brain feel the silence. To understand what happens next, you need to know what you're really quitting. Most people think this week is about no dopamine. It isn't. You're not turning off a pleasure chemical. You're changing how your brain listens to its main motivation signal. Dopamine is less about joy and more about pursuit. Imagine a tiny chemical hand pointing and saying, chase that again. It surges not only when you get a reward, but especially when you anticipate it, when your brain predicts that something good might be coming. Each spike teaches your cells what is worth your energy, what should be repeated, and what can be ignored. Think of it this way. Dopamine is your brain's internal voting system. Every notification, every swipe, every bite of ultra-processed food gets a ballot. High-intensity rewards cast very loud votes. Over time, your brain learns that quick hits of stimulation are worth more than slow, effortful rewards like reading, deep work, or real conversation. Modern life hijacks this system. short-form videos, endless scrolling, junk food, porn, constant novelty, each one is designed to trigger sharp, frequent dopamine bursts. It's like living next to a casino that follows you into your pocket. Your brain starts expecting a jackpot every 30 seconds, and anything slower feels dull, even if it's deeply meaningful. Inside your brain, several key regions are caught in this storm. The striatum, the core of your habit loops, lights up when a cue promises reward and pushes you toward automatic behaviors. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, self-control, and long-term goals, has to fight that pull with limited willpower. Meanwhile, your amygdala tags experiences with emotional color, amplifying anxiety when rewards are missing, and your default mode network drifts into mind-wandering and rumination when stimulation drops. This is the phase when your 7-day break matters. You are not removing dopamine. Your body cannot function without it, and you shouldn't want to. You are removing the artificially frequent spikes that keep those circuits in a constant sprint. In fact, the goal is to let your baseline dopamine and your receptors in regions like the striatum recalibrate, so normal life stops feeling flat compared to your screen. Think of it this way. If your ears have been blasted by loud music, silence feels uncomfortable at first. But given time, you start to hear subtle sounds again, a message from a friend, the wind, your own thoughts. Dopamine works the same way. Reduce the volume of constant hits, and sensitivity can begin to return. The central tension is simple and brutal. Your brain has been trained to expect a reward every few moments. What happens when you stop feeding that loop for an entire week? Can these circuits really shift in just 7 days? Or does the boredom and craving simply break you first? Next, you'll see what the science says day by day as your brain moves through withdrawal, resistance, and the first signs of reset. Hour zero begins the moment you decide. No quick dopamine hits for a week, no scrolling in bed, no snack rewards, no instant entertainment. Your brain has been trained to expect a reward every few moments. And now the taps are off. Imagine the very first morning. You wake up, hand drifting toward your phone, almost before your eyes are fully open. The motion is automatic. Then you remember the challenge. You stop. There's a tiny spike of irritation, a flash of just this once. That micro surge is your reward system firing in expectation, primed for the hit it usually gets from a bright screen and endless novelty. This is the phase when you notice how deep the loop runs. Within minutes, you feel a faint restlessness, a mild anxiety that doesn't have a clear cause. Getting out of bed feels heavier than usual. Tasks you normally slide into, checking messages, scanning headlines, opening your favorite app, are suddenly off limits. It's like your morning has lost its color. Everything feels flat, slightly boring, as if someone turned down the contrast on your entire day. Under the surface, your brain is adjusting its dopamine rhythm. Those sharp, phasic spikes that came from notifications, short videos, and micro rewards are missing. Dopamine isn't gone, baseline levels are still there. But the peaks are blunted. Think of it this way. You've been riding a series of tiny roller coasters all day, every day. Now the track is dead straight and your brain is not impressed. This is where reward prediction error shows up. Over time, your brain has learned that certain cues, the buzz of your phone, the sight of a browser icon, the rustle of a snack bag, predict a reward. Dopamine actually rises before the reward, teaching your cells this cue matters. When the cue appears but the reward never arrives, dopamine briefly dips below baseline. That dip is the hollow, dissatisfied feeling that whispers, something is missing. Meanwhile, the striatum, your habit center, keeps firing its old routines. See phone, check phone, Feel a tiny stress spike, open a comfort app. Walk past the kitchen, grab a quick snack. These loops are efficient, almost reflexive. But now the loop no longer completes. The cue fires, the action is blocked, and the expected dopamine payoff never lands. You feel that mismatch as friction, craving, frustration, a sense of being mentally itchy with no way to scratch it. By the afternoon and evening of day one, your brain is testing you. Focus feels slippery. You might pace, open and close tabs, stare at tasks without starting. In fact, this isn't weakness, it's circuitry in transition. Your prefrontal cortex is trying to override patterns your striatum has automated for years. By the end of the first 24 hours, you are not reset. You are in the earliest phase of a withdrawal-like adaptation. This marks a turning point. Your brain is starting to realize this isn't a brief outage, but a new pattern. The question is, what happens when it finally believes you and begins to fight back even harder on day two? Day two is when the silence gets loud. The novelty of your dopamine detox has worn off, and now you are face to face with the raw, unfiltered texture of your day. Imagine sitting down to work and feeling an almost magnetic pull to just check once. One notification, one quick scroll, one video. Boredom doesn't feel mild, it feels heavy, like a pressure in your chest. Slow tasks become infuriating. Waiting for a file to load, reading a dense paragraph, or doing deep work feels unbearable compared to the instant hits your brain is used to. Subjectively, there is a strange emptiness. The moments you used to fill automatically, on the toilet, in line, between tasks, now stretch out. Your hand might even twitch toward your pocket. Before you remember, you've cut off the supply. It's like your brain keeps opening a door to a room that no longer exists. Underneath that experience, your striatum is protesting. This is the phase when your main habit and reward hub, buried deep in your brain, realizes the usual pattern is broken. Think of it this way. Repeated high-intensity stimulation from social media, rapid-fire videos, ultra-tasty snacks, and constant novelty has trained your striatum to expect quick, bright bursts of dopamine. Over time, it has become exquisitely tuned to those fast rewards and comparatively numb to low-intensity, delayed rewards like reading, studying, or slow creative work. In fact, this rewiring is visible in brain scans of people with behavioral addictions. The same circuitry that lights up in drug dependence also activates in compulsive gaming, gambling, or porn use. Your brain learns that rapid, unpredictable rewards are worth more, so your motivation system fires hardest for whatever is immediate and easy. Meanwhile, dopamine receptors in your striatum adapt. With chronic overstimulation, they can downregulate or become less sensitive, like turning down the volume because the music has been blasting for too long. Baseline dopamine signaling drops. Normal life, conversations, a walk, a book, feels flat. When you suddenly remove the high-intensity hits, there is no instant relief. Your receptors have not upregulated yet, so you feel a dip before any lift. This is behavioral withdrawal, irritability, restlessness, low mood, even a foggy, nothing feels good sensation are all common when your brain has been running on constant micro rewards. It's not just in your head. It is your reward circuitry recalculating. The same pattern appears when heavy gamers stop cold turkey or when someone steps away from compulsive betting. Mood often worsens first, then slowly stabilizes. But hidden inside this discomfort is a pivot point. If you push through, the second day, through the boredom spikes, the phantom phone reaches, the urge to cave just this once, your brain begins to do something unexpected around days 3 and 4. Reward thresholds start to shift, baseline motivation begins to move, and the very activities that feel unbearable right now begin to change flavor. The real question is, what does that shift look like from the inside, and how far can it go if you keep going? To answer that, you need to hit pause on the timeline for a moment. Before going deeper into days 3, 4, and beyond, there's a problem hiding in the name of this whole experiment: dopamine detox. Neuroscientists quietly wince at that phrase. Dopamine is not a toxin. It's not like glucose spikes or trans fat that your body might need a break from. It's a core signaling molecule, a chemical your brain uses every second to move your muscles, learn from experience, and decide what is worth doing next. Without dopamine, you literally cannot initiate action. You don't want to detox it. Imagine trying to detox electricity from a city. You could turn off the neon signs and the giant billboards, but you still need power for hospitals, traffic lights, and basic life support. Dopamine works the same way. Even when you cut out social media, junk food, porn, or compulsive scrolling, your brain still releases dopamine to help you get out of bed, plan your day, and feel a spark of motivation when you make progress. Think of it this way. You are not removing dopamine, you are changing the pattern of stimulation that drives it. In the first days, your reward system is used to fast, bright hits, notifications, ultra-tasty snacks, constant novelty. Those are like blaring speakers in your mental sound system. When you stop feeding them, your brain doesn't go silent. It just becomes painfully aware of the sudden drop in volume. This is the phase when the metaphor really matters. Detox makes it sound as if dopamine itself is dirty, as if the goal is purity through deprivation. That mindset pushes you toward extremes. Locking away every screen, avoiding all pleasure, treating normal enjoyment like a relapse. In fact, your brain is not trying to become empty. It's trying to recalibrate. It's like walking out of a nightclub into a quiet street. At first, the silence feels wrong, too flat, too boring. But as your ears adjust, you start to hear smaller sounds: footsteps, wind, distant traffic. In your brain, those smaller sounds are the subtler rewards that modern life often drowns out. Reading a few pages without checking your phone, finishing a workout, a real conversation, slow progress on a long project. This marks a turning point in how you think about the next few days. You are not cleansing a poison, you are turning down a distorted channel so the rest of your mental orchestra can come through. Your prefrontal cortex, striatum, and deeper motivation circuits are trying to find a new volume setting that fits reality instead of constant stimulation. Meanwhile, every uncomfortable moment ahead, every wave of boredom, every restless urge to just check something is no longer a failure. It is your reward system actively searching for a new baseline. With that frame in place, you can step back into the day-by-day journey and watch how your brain renegotiates motivation from days 3 to 7. By day 3, something subtle but important starts to shift. The cravings are still there, but for the first time, they don't feel like the only voice in your head. Imagine sitting at your desk and noticing a tiny gap between the urge and the action. The urge to check your phone still fires, but there's a brief pause where you actually consider staying with your task. Maybe you realize you've been reading for 10 uninterrupted minutes. Maybe a quiet room doesn't feel like an emergency anymore. It's not comfortable yet, but it's no longer unbearable. This is the phase when the prefrontal cortex begins to wake up. Think of it this way. Your prefrontal cortex is the CEO of your brain. It plans, prioritizes, holds long-term goals in mind, and says no when the rest of your brain screams now. Under constant quick hits, the CEO keeps getting dragged out of meetings by alarms, notifications, and tiny pleasures that promise instant payoff. In fact, every ping, swipe, and micro reward has been acting like a fake crisis. Your prefrontal cortex has to drop whatever it is doing, reorient, and decide what matters. That constant task switching is not free. It burns limited mental energy, the same energy you need for self-control, deep work, and meaningful decisions. Neuroscientists call this cognitive load, the total amount of information your brain has to juggle in the moment. By day 3, without quick dopamine hits, you are quietly reducing that load. Fewer notifications means fewer fires for the CEO to rush to. It's like clearing its cluttered desk so your brain can finally see the one important document in front of it. You start to notice you can stay with boring emails a bit longer, or you can feel an impulse and let it pass instead of automatically obeying it. Meanwhile, something else is happening beneath the surface. Your striatum, the region that runs habit loops and chases rewards, is still pushing you toward old patterns. But the prefrontal cortex is regaining leverage. Those slightly longer attention spans, that extra second of willpower before opening a new tab, the growing awareness of how often you used to seek stimulation. These are signs that top-down control is coming back online. This marks a turning point. You are not cured and your brain is not calm yet, but the balance of power is starting to shift. Boredom still bites, but you can watch it instead of instantly medicating it. Discomfort shows up and there is just enough mental space to ask, do I really need a hit right now? What happens next when that CEO gets even stronger, when silence stops feeling empty and starts fueling motivation, is where the week takes an unexpected turn. Day 4 feels different, not easy, but different. Imagine waking up and reaching for your phone on autopilot and pausing. The urge is there like a muscle twitch, but it's weaker, thinner, less convincing. You still notice the absence of quick hits, yet something else is emerging underneath. A faint sense that your mind isn't being yanked around every few seconds. Walking to the kitchen, making breakfast, even washing a dish feels less like dead time and more like neutral ground. This is the phase when boredom quietly begins to transform into clarity. Earlier in the week, simple activities felt brutally empty because your brain was comparing them to the fireworks of endless scrolling, snacks, and constant novelty. Now, with those peaks dialed down, your internal reference point is shifting. A slow walk, a page of a book, a calm conversation doesn't thrill you, but it doesn't feel intolerable either. It's like the volume on "this is pointless" has been turned down a notch. Under the surface, your dopamine system is recalibrating. Think of it this way: all those rapid spikes from notifications, junk food, or instant entertainment pushed your dopamine above baseline again and again. In response, your brain protected itself by making receptors less sensitive, so regular life felt flat. With fewer extreme peaks, baseline dopamine and receptor responsiveness can begin to normalize. Everyday activities are still low intensity, but they no longer sit against a backdrop of constant, artificial fireworks, so they feel less painfully dull. Mood starts to follow this same curve. The emotional whiplash of micro highs and micro lows begins to smooth out. Instead of tiny surges of excitement every time you check something, followed by subtle crashes when there's nothing rewarding, your brain's reward, circuits fire more steadily. In fact, neuroscientists describe this as fewer reward prediction errors, fewer moments where your brain screams, "Where's my hit?" and punishes you when it doesn't arrive. The result is a quieter, more even emotional landscape. Meanwhile, subtle cognitive changes are stacking up. You notice fewer phantom vibrations. Your hand drifts toward a new tab, then stops midair. You can sit with a single thought for 30 seconds, then a minute, without reflexively reaching for stimulation. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that plans, resists impulses, and holds goals in mind, is no longer constantly interrupted by novelty alarms from the habit centers deeper inside. This marks a turning point. Boredom hasn't vanished, but it has lost its urgency. In that extra mental space, you can actually observe your own impulses rather than being dragged by them. And tucked inside that space is the beginning of something bigger. Motivation that isn't chained to instant rewards. As you move into days 5 and 6, the same neural circuits that once chased tiny hits of pleasure start to redirect toward harder, longer-term targets. That is where the real payoff of this reset begins to appear. This is the phase when you finally see how fast your brain can pivot. In just a few days without quick hits, cravings that felt automatic start to hesitate. Your mood isn't whipped around by every notification, and your focus holds a little longer than before. Think of it this way. If a handful of days can already bend your motivation circuits, that means your brain is far more plastic and adaptable than it feels when you are in the middle of a craving. Those tiny shifts in patience and how long you can sit with boredom are not random. They are your dopamine receptors recalibrating, your reward system quietly changing its expectations. It's like discovering that the you who reaches for the phone, the snack, or the next tab isn't fixed at all. That version is just the product of repeated training. Modern life has been drilling your striatum with fast, high-intensity rewards. Now, by stepping back for a week, you are finally seeing what happens when that training program is interrupted. If this kind of invisible remodeling interests you, how everyday habits reshape your brain and body, and how to use that biology to your advantage, this channel is built around exactly that. Imagine treating your attention, your cravings, even your sense of effort the way an athlete treats muscles and lungs. As systems you can deliberately train, not mysterious forces that randomly show up or disappear. Subscribing here is not about collecting more content. In fact, it is more like extending this 7-day experiment into a longer lab. Each video becomes another controlled test. What happens to your brain when you change sleep or light exposure or the timing of your meals? How your hormones, your metabolism, and your motivation respond over hours and days. Meanwhile, your current reset is still unfolding. You are only partway through. The most dramatic changes in this process usually appear later when motivation starts to feel cleaner and simple activities, walking outside, reading, even doing one hard task, begin to light up reward pathways that used to be numb from overstimulation. This marks a turning point in the story. Up to now, the focus has been on withdrawal, boredom, and the early friction of cutting out quick dopamine. Next, the camera moves deeper inside your brain. Regions that have been mostly in the background so far start to take center stage. In the upcoming chapter, you will see how your amygdala reacts when the usual stream of easy rewards is cut off and why anxiety can spike before it settles. You will look at the default mode network, the set of regions that light up when your mind wanders, and how fasting from constant stimulation changes its patterns of rumination and daydreaming. By the end of this week, those networks will not look or feel the same. Now step into the next phase and watch what happens as your brain's deeper emotional and narrative systems begin to adapt. Now you move from the wide-angle view of networks into the close-up of circuits fighting for control of your attention. Imagine zooming into the center of your brain, into a curved structure called the striatum. This is the habit and reward hub. It quietly tracks what you do, what you get, and how worth it each behavior feels. 7 days without quick dopamine hits is like forcing the system to rewrite its price tags. At the start of the week, your striatum is convinced that scrolling, swiping, and checking are premium rewards. They have been reinforced thousands of times. Each notification used to mean a small surge of dopamine, a signal that says, "Remember this. Do it again." When you stop feeding it, the striatum fires prediction errors. It expected a hit and nothing came. This mismatch is uncomfortable. But it is also how your brain learns. Over repeated disappointments, those old loops begin to devalue. Think of it this way. The brain's internal marketplace quietly lowers the price on mindless scrolling and starts raising the value of anything that still delivers genuine satisfaction, like finishing a task or having a real conversation. Meanwhile, another structure reacts to this sudden silence. The amygdala. This almond-shaped region is your threat detector and emotional alarm. In the early days, when familiar rewards vanish, the amygdala may spike anxiety, irritability, and a strange sense that something is wrong even if your life is objectively fine. It is like an internal siren protesting, "Where did all the easy comfort go?" But as the week goes on and your environment stops bombarding you with bright, urgent cues, that same system has fewer triggers to process. Baseline arousal can drop. This is the phase when your emotional swings may soften, not because your world changed, but because your amygdala is no longer being yanked around every few seconds. Now return to the default mode network. With less external input, it initially floods you with rumination. Old memories, imagined arguments, endless what-ifs. It can feel louder and more chaotic than any social feed. In fact, this is your brain trying to fill the silence. But as your striatum stops chasing micro-rewards, the default mode network can shift. It becomes slightly less like background noise and more like a space for deliberate reflection. You notice patterns in your thoughts. You catch automatic comparisons before they spiral. As the week unfolds, these regions start to collaborate differently with your prefrontal cortex, the area behind your forehead that handles planning and self-control. Less compulsive checking. A small drop in reflexive social comparison, a growing awareness of your own internal signals. It's like your attention, once rented out to every app and alert, slowly returns to home base. But this marks a turning point. As your circuits adapt, your sense of what is rewarding is about to shift more dramatically. That shift can free you to focus on what actually matters. Or, if you are not careful, it can push you into a fresh set of hidden compulsions. In the next phase, you will see exactly how that choice is written into your brain's chemistry. But before going deeper into that chemistry, pause the timeline for a moment. Because there is a quiet belief running in the background of this whole 7-day experiment. If you break, if you binge, if you check your phone at 1 a.m., it must mean you are weak, lacking discipline, failing the challenge. Imagine watching yourself cave on day 3 and instantly turning it into a moral verdict. Other people can do this. What is wrong with me? This is the phase when a lot of people quietly quit, not because their brain is broken, but because the story they tell about willpower is. Think of it this way. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain right behind your forehead, is the control tower for focus, planning, and self-control. It burns a lot of energy. It tires easily, and it is relatively small compared to the deep reward circuits buried underneath. Meanwhile, your striatum, your dopamine-driven habit center, has been trained for years by notifications, snacks, tabs, and infinite scroll. It is fast, automatic, and emotionally charged. It is like asking a single air traffic controller to fight an entire storm system. The prefrontal cortex can say, "Do not open that app," but the striatum has already linked that icon, that sound, that late-night glow to a surge of dopamine. In fact, those circuits are designed to chase easy, predictable rewards because in a world of food scarcity and danger, that wiring kept your body alive. Now it just keeps your thumb moving. This is why just use willpower backfires. You are not failing because you lack character. You are colliding with architecture. Relying on willpower alone is like trying to hold back a river with your hands. For a few seconds, you can push against the current. Then, the water wins. Redesigning your environment is the dam. Delete the app and the cue disappears. Block the site, and the shortcut between boredom and reward is interrupted. Do not buy the trigger food, and your brain never gets the visual signal that normally fires up the striatum and pulls your metabolism toward quick glucose hits. Instead of wrestling urges all day, you quietly reduce the number of times those dopamine pathways are even activated. Less activation means less need for heroic self-control. It is like rerouting a river into calmer channels. The water still flows, but now it moves through habits that do not hijack your attention every 5 minutes. Over several days of fewer hits, your dopamine receptors begin to reset. Your baseline levels stabilize, and your prefrontal cortex is no longer outgunned every hour. Your brain is not trying harder. The battlefield is different. So as the story moves into days 5 through 7, look at your experience through this new lens. The quieter cravings, the more stable mood, the sudden ability to sit with boredom a little longer. These are signs of hardware slowly rewiring in response to a redesigned environment. And in the next phase, you will see how that calmer river of dopamine changes what feels rewarding in your daily life. By day 5, something subtle but important starts to happen. The world doesn't look different, but it feels different. This marks a turning point. Imagine stepping outside for a short walk, the same route you usually rush through with a podcast blaring and your phone in hand. Today, without the constant drip of fast dopamine, the air feels a bit crisper, the colors a bit richer, the simple rhythm of your steps a bit more satisfying. It's not euphoria, it's a quiet, noticeable, this is nice. This is the phase when your reward threshold begins to shift. After months or years of chronic overstimulation, your brain had been trained to respond only to big, fast spikes. New notifications, new videos, new tabs, new snacks, small rewards, barely registered. Think of it this way. Your internal volume knob for pleasure had been turned up so high that everyday experiences sounded like a whisper. Several days of lower input start turning that knob back down, so the whisper becomes audible again. Under the surface, your dopamine system is recalibrating. Baseline dopamine, which had been dragged downward by constant peaks, has a chance to stabilize. The gap between normal and excited becomes smaller, so it takes less to feel a nudge of motivation. It's like going from needing a stadium concert just to feel awake, to actually noticing the melody of a single instrument. Meanwhile, your receptors are beginning their own quiet adjustment. Major receptor level remodeling takes longer than a week, but even short-term reductions in high-intensity input can change how responsive your system feels. When you aren't hammering your dopamine receptors all day, they aren't as numb. The same modest signal from a walk, a conversation, or making progress on a task now produces a clearer internal response. You notice it in practical moments. A boring email gets answered without a war in your head. Washing dishes feels neutral instead of unbearable. Finishing a small task gives a tiny but real sense of completion. In fact, many people describe day 5 as the first day where effort feels slightly rewarding again, not just exhausting. Take the student who used to check TikTok every 5 minutes while studying. Before this reset, the brain had learned that a short video was the fastest way to get a dopamine bump, so textbooks never stood a chance. By day 5 of cutting out quick hits, something different happens. They sit down, feel the familiar itch to reach for the phone, but the urge is weaker and passes faster. 90 minutes later, a chapter is done. And there's a small, clean dopamine hit from that completion itself. No scrolling required. This new sensitivity is powerful, but it's fragile. Your brain is in a transitional state, not a finished upgrade. a single binge of high-intensity stimulation can yank the threshold upward again, teaching your circuits that the real reward is still out there on a screen. How you handle days 6 and 7 will decide whether this gentler, more responsive system stabilizes or snaps back. In the next phase, you will see how protecting this renewed sensitivity can transform focus, motivation, and even how your future habits wire themselves into your brain. By day 6, the experiment stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like possibility. The same to-do list that looked impossible a few days ago now feels negotiable. You still feel resistance when you sit down to work. Opening the laptop, starting the document, reviewing the notes, there is effort. But the invisible magnet pulling you toward just one video or just one scroll is weaker. It's like the volume on those urges has been turned down, so you can actually hear a quieter signal underneath. The intention to do what you said you would do. This is the phase when your prefrontal cortex begins to reclaim territory. This region, right behind your forehead, is the part of your brain that holds goals in mind, suppresses impulses, and sequences complex actions. Earlier in the week, it was constantly outvoted by the striatum, the deep habit circuitry that had been trained to chase fast, bright dopamine hits. Now, with fewer high-intensity options available, the negotiation shifts. Think of it this way. Your striatum is a reward accountant. It tracks what usually pays off when you remove rapid-fire rewards. That accountant is forced to reevaluate the balance sheet. Answering emails without checking your phone, studying for 40 minutes, writing a page of code or an outline. These behaviors start to generate relatively more dopamine simply because the competing spikes are gone. In fact, brain imaging studies show that when people repeatedly choose effortful tasks over easy distractions, striatal activity begins to favor those effortful choices. Subjectively, this shows up as an odd new experience. Working still costs energy, but it doesn't feel as pointless. You notice tiny hits of satisfaction when you finish a paragraph, solve a problem, or move a task from in progress to done. The reward prediction system in your brain is being recalibrated. Instead of expecting a hit every few seconds from a screen, it starts to expect a slower, steadier return from focused effort. Meanwhile, another phenomenon becomes more accessible: flow. Imagine sitting down to read, expecting the usual restlessness, and then looking up to realize 45 minutes have passed. Time compresses. The edge of craving softens. Your body is still working, your brain is still exerting control, but the friction between want to escape and need to focus is lower. Reduced interruptions mean your prefrontal cortex can maintain a stable network of activity, allowing you to stay inside a single task long enough for it to become smoother. People who try dopamine fasts or strict digital minimalism often report that around day 5 or 6, they can finally read dense books, write deeply, or code for long stretches without the constant itch to check something else. It's like the default mode of your metabolism for attention has changed. Instead of burning through focus in tiny bursts, your brain shifts toward longer, cleaner runs of concentration. This marks a turning point. Your circuits are learning that effort can be rewarding again, but there is a catch. The real test is not how your brain behaves when stimulation is absent. It's what happens when you let it back in. On the other side of day 7, your nervous system will have to decide which rewards to cling to and which to discard. And that decision is not as conscious as you might think. Imagine hearing all of this and feeling a quiet temptation. If less stimulation is good, then 0 must be perfect. This is the phase when the experiment can quietly twist into something darker. Your brain loves extremes. It turns balance into a contest, and suddenly you are not just reducing quick hits, You are trying to erase every trace of enjoyment. Think of it this way. You start by cutting social media, junk food, and endless scrolling. Then you begin questioning music, hanging out with friends, even reading fiction because they feel too good. On the surface, it looks disciplined. Underneath, your brain may be building a new rigid rule set, driven by fear of relapse instead of healthy control. This marks a turning point. Done too aggressively, a dopamine reset can push you toward isolation. You say no to invitations because they might be too stimulating. You avoid hobbies that used to recharge you. Your body is calmer, but your social world shrinks. Meanwhile, your inner dialogue can turn harsh. Every slip becomes proof that you are weak. Every notification checked becomes a failure. It's like trading one compulsion for another. You drop compulsive scrolling, but now you compulsively track your hours of deep work. You cut binge watching, but obsess over productivity metrics, streaks, and self-optimization. The behavior looks different, yet the same reward circuits in your brain's striatum are still chasing rigid, all-or-nothing goals. Here's the pattern interrupt. Dopamine itself is not the villain. In fact, your brain needs dopamine to move, to care, to learn. Too little. Dopamine signaling is linked to anhedonia, low motivation, even clinical depression. In extreme cases, severe dopamine loss in specific brain pathways contributes to Parkinson's disease, where movement and initiation become painfully difficult. So the goal is not to shut dopamine down. The goal is to retrain when and how it fires. Healthy dopamine is tied to effort and meaning. Finishing a workout, mastering a new skill, having a deep conversation. These rewards still activate your brain's motivation circuits, but they are buffered by time, challenge, and real connection. By contrast, the quick hits you are targeting, mindless feeds, rapid-fire clips, ultra-processed snacks, compulsive porn, flood your reward system with fast, high-intensity spikes. Over time, your receptors adapt, demanding more stimulation for the same effect. That is the loop you are breaking, not joy itself. So as you move into the final days of the 7-day reset, do not treat it as a march toward zero stimulation. Treat it as an audit. Which sources of dopamine leave your body drained, scattered, and numb? Which ones leave your brain clearer, your relationships deeper, your long-term goals easier to approach? Because the real power of this experiment is not in what you remove for 7 days. It is in what you consciously decide to invite back in on day 8 and what you leave behind for good. Imagine waking up on day 7 and realizing the silence on your phone doesn't feel like an emergency anymore. The itch to check, scroll, or snack is still there, but it's quieter. Less like a fire alarm, and more like background noise you can choose to ignore. This is the phase when your brain is no longer in crisis mode. Cravings still flicker when you're bored, stressed, or alone, but they don't slam your attention the way they did on day 1. You can sit on the couch with no screen for a few minutes and not feel like you're crawling out of your skin. In fact, simple pleasures start to stand out again. The taste of a normal meal, a walk outside, a real conversation. Your mind feels less yanked around by every impulse, more able to stay with one thing long enough to actually enjoy it. Underneath that experience, your neurochemistry has shifted. The huge dopamine spikes from constant novelty are no longer hammering your receptors. Instead of wild peaks and crashes, your brain is running on a more stable baseline. Think of it this way. It's like turning down a blaring speaker so you can finally hear the subtler instruments in the background. Early signs of normalized receptor sensitivity mean your reward system isn't as numb, so everyday life feels a little less gray and washed out. Key regions have been quietly rewiring all week. The striatum, which tracks habits and reward patterns, has updated its priorities. With fewer instant hits available, it starts tagging different behaviors, reading, working out, focused work, as more valuable because they consistently deliver steady dopamine, not chaotic bursts. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex has reclaimed bandwidth. With fewer distractions hijacking your attention, this region can hold goals in mind for longer, resist urges more easily, and steer behavior instead of just reacting. Your amygdala, the alarm center that flares with anxiety and threat, is also less constantly triggered. Without a non-stop stream of emotional headlines, arguments, and comparison feeds, its baseline activation drops. That translates into fewer random spikes of unease and a more even mood across the day. And the default mode network, the set of regions that light up when your mind wanders, is less chaotic. Rumination and mental noise are still there, but they feel more like passing clouds than a storm you're trapped inside. By day 7, these internal shifts start to show up in how you live. Concentration feels more accessible. You notice you can read a few pages without bouncing to another tab. Compulsive checking eases. You might still reach for your phone, but you catch the movement, pause, and sometimes put it back down. Ordinary activities, cooking, cleaning, even organizing your space, can feel unexpectedly satisfying because your reward system is no longer calibrated only to extremes. This marks a turning point in how you relate to motivation itself. Without constant novelty, you see more clearly what actually matters when your brain isn't chasing micro rewards every few seconds. Long-term goals stop feeling as impossible, not because they got easier, but because your attention is less fractured. But this new baseline is fragile. Your receptors are more responsive, your reward thresholds are lower, and that means old sources of stimulation can hit even harder than before. The big question now is simple. When you let social media, junk food, or binge-worthy content back in, do you reinforce your new balance or snap straight back to the old loop? And what would it take to enjoy dopamine again without letting it run your life on day 8 and beyond? This is the phase when your choices matter more than your willpower slogans. After 7 days of calmer input, your brain is like a freshly rewired sound system. If you blast it with maximum volume again, the speakers can distort fast. Imagine opening your phone just to check one thing, and suddenly an hour disappears. After a week of lower stimulation, this rebound can feel brutally intense. Dopamine receptors in your striatum are more responsive. Your reward prediction circuits are hungry, and a flood of clips, junk food, or porn can rapidly reteach your brain that the easiest, loudest signal wins. It's like teaching your metabolism to burn clean fuel for a week, then force-feeding pure sugar until your insulin spikes again. Think of it this way. Reintroduction is not a casual scroll, it's a protocol. You set specific windows for social media instead of grazing all day. 15 or 30 minutes once or twice with a clear end point. You choose higher quality content that informs or inspires, not endless novelty engineered to keep you hooked. Meanwhile, you avoid stacking hits, no snacking while scrolling, no jumping from short videos to gaming to late-night binging in one continuous stream. Each layer multiplies the dopamine surge and trains your brain to expect fireworks for zero effort. Habit replacement becomes your quiet advantage here. Your brain has relearned that slower rewards, finishing a task, reading, training your body, can actually feel reachable again. So you deliberately pair mild dopamine with meaningful effort. Music while you walk, not while you rabbit hole on social media. A podcast that teaches you something while you cook instead of autoplay drama. Using your screen to learn a skill, not only to chase the next unpredictable clip. This keeps your striatum valuing effortful rewards, so motivation signals continue to point toward action rather than escape. Reflection is the hidden lab of this whole experiment. Over the last 7 days, you collected data without realizing it. What did you genuinely miss? What disappeared from your life and you barely noticed? When did you feel unexpectedly clear or calm? Those patterns show which habits deserve a smaller footprint and which may need to be cut out almost entirely. In fact, this is where your prefrontal cortex steps up, using memory and insight to redraw the map that your habits will follow. This marks a turning point in your relationship with dopamine. It's not a magical cleanse, it's a renegotiated contract. You're teaching your brain that dopamine is a signal in service of your long-term goals, not a tyrant that hijacks every spare minute. The real reset is not the week you restricted stimulation, but the way you handle day 8, day 9, and day 30. And the next shift your brain is about to make might be even more surprising than the detox itself. This marks a turning point. Those 7 days weren't just a detox, they were a diagnostic. Imagine stepping out of a noisy city for the first time in years and suddenly noticing how loud it really was. That's what you did with your reward system. By stripping away quick hits, you gave your brain a rare silence, long enough to hear how loudly it had been screaming for the next notification, the next clip, the next tiny spike of dopamine. Think of it this way. Your brain is a survival orchestra. Every region is an instrument, from the prefrontal cortex on focus to the striatum on habits and the amygdala on threat detection. Dopamine isn't the villain in this orchestra. It's the conductor of motivation, deciding which section gets the loudest cue. Your 7-day experiment wasn't about firing the conductor, it was about changing the sheet music. Before this, most of that music was outsourced. Algorithms, endless feeds, ultra-processed snacks, and constant novelty had quiet control over what your brain found exciting. A red notification could move you faster than a long-term goal. A short video could override a deep work session. In fact, your metabolism of motivation was being spent on micro-rewards that vanished as quickly as they appeared. During the week, that became obvious. Boredom hit, cravings spiked, your brain threw up error messages. Because the usual pattern of cue-click dopamine was broken. But underneath the discomfort, receptors were adjusting. Reward prediction errors were recalibrating, and the baseline of your motivation system was shifting away from pure instant gratification. Now something different is possible. The same dopamine that once surged for a scroll can be trained to surge for a skill, a relationship, or a long-term project. It's like redirecting a powerful river. The water doesn't disappear, the channel changes. When you repeat deep work, real conversations, or physical training, your brain learns, this is where energy should go. This is the phase when a crucial realization lands. Your brain isn't broken, it's efficient. It simply became very good at responding to what you repeatedly rewarded. Your job now is not to get rid of dopamine, but to become intentional about what earns it. Change the cues, change the routines, and over time, the orchestra plays a different song automatically. So the key question shifts. Instead of asking, how do you avoid dopamine? Ask, what do you want your brain to find rewarding a month from now? And what can you start reinforcing today? Because the way you reintroduce stimulation after these 7 days will decide whether this was a temporary pause or the beginning of a redesigned reward system your future self can actually rely on. So this is the phase when the experiment stops being theory and becomes a choice. You've seen what happens when constant novelty is cut off, even just in imagination. On day 1, your brain panics. You reach for your phone before your eyes are fully open. Check pockets that are empty. Feel that strange, hollow jolt when there is no notification waiting. It feels like something is missing, but biologically, it is your reward circuits searching for their usual hit and not finding it. By the middle of the week, the discomfort peaks. This is the phase when boredom feels sharp, almost physical. You pace, you open and close apps with nothing to see, you stare at snacks, tabs, or old habits that used to give instant relief. Meanwhile, your brain is recalibrating in the background. Dopamine receptors begin to regain sensitivity, and the gap between craving and action becomes visible instead of automatic. It is like watching your own habit loops from the outside for the first time. Then, as day 7 approaches, something subtle shifts. Your attention holds a little longer on one task. A walk, a conversation, or even making a meal starts to feel more satisfying than it did before. Imagine your brain's volume knob turning down on urgent noise and turning up on quiet signals that were always there. This marks a turning point. The same brain that chased every ping now finds genuine reward in simple, stable experiences. Think of it this way. Your brain is not fixed hardware. It is living tissue that responds to training. In fact, even 7 days of fewer quick hits are enough to show that plasticity in real time. Dopamine is still there, but the way your cells respond to it changes. You are not detoxing a toxin. You are retraining a prediction system that had been hijacked by endless novelty. So what happens next is up to you. You do not need a full 7-day overhaul to feel this. You can run a mini experiment, 24 hours without social media, or 3 days without ultra-processed snacks, or a weekend with no endless scrolling at night. Pick one high dopamine habit, remove it temporarily, and watch what your brain does. The withdrawal, the boredom, and then the small, surprising moments of clarity. That arc will be there, just compressed. If you want to keep exploring how everyday choices reshape your brain and your body, there is more waiting. You can subscribe, watch the next video on how your habits rewire motivation circuits, or share this with someone who is always just checking their phone. Because this experiment is not really about 7 days. It is about a question that stretches far beyond that. If your brain can change this much in 7 days, without quick hits, what could it become in 7 weeks of rewarding the things you actually care about?